Jacqueline Hughes-Oliver, who is a professor of statistics at North Carolina State University in the US. So she's joining us via Zoom. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. So just a little background, like they did their PhD in stat from North Carolina State University from 91. She has held various distinguished positions, including Director of Exploratory Center for Cheminformatics Research at North Carolina State, also Director of Graduate Programs at North Carolina State Department of Statistics. And her research focuses on prediction and classification, analysis of high-dimensional data, variable and model selection with dimension reduction, and a lot more. Professor Hughes-Oliver is a fellow of American Association for Advanced Science, and she is also a fellow of American Statistical Institution, and she was awarded 2014 Blackwell Tapia Prize for Research Excellence. And yeah, we are very happy to have her speak. So yeah, without further ado, yeah.
Thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me well. Thank you for the invitation to speak, and good afternoon. So I am a huge fan of David Blackwell. So I've really enjoyed learning about his life and taking lessons that I can incorporate into my own life. So it's a great pleasure for me to be able to share some of what I've learned with you today. While I did meet David Blackwell once, I certainly was not an acquaintance. So to really give you an authentic view of Professor Blackwell, I've relied rather heavily on quotes, his own words. This quote, in fact, about his pursuit of research, not for the sake of research, but rather for the sake of understanding, is quite powerful. And I'll also share quotes from people who knew him well. In fact, there are so many quotes that I won't read them all, or this presentation will never end, but this is being recorded, so you'll be able to review the quotes later. So I have been asked to share a bit of my background. That will be the first section. But the vast majority of this presentation will be about David Blackwell himself. And I will spend quite a bit of time on his personal life, because I think there is much to be learned from his personal life. Then I'll close by sharing some numbers regarding diversity of the math and statistical sciences in the United States. So here, J stands for Jackie. That's me. I am the sum of my experiences, as we all are. And this graphic is deliberate in that it shows what some people will view as negative experiences. They take you down. But you know, my philosophy is that those down periods of life still serve a tremendous purpose, in that they polish us into diamonds and prepare us for what is to come. So our challenge is to learn from them the best we can as we prepare to move forward. I was born on the island of Jamaica, in the capital, Kingston, and I did not move to the US until I was 15 years old. I was raised by my grandmother. My grandmother had 12 children of her own, who she raised. She raised other people's children. She raised a large proportion of her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren. And it really was the culture. Parents had to leave the island to find employment to support their families. So I grew up seeing my mother once or maybe twice a year. And I completed high school in Jamaica. and was always around a very large extended family. Our family home was 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. But the thing is, we always had at least 10 people living in that home at a time. And here is my grandmother. Here's me. I just graduated from high school. I had left and now was living in the United States with my mother. And the rest of the people here, these are a subset of my family members who are now living in our home. So we did not have much, but we have love. And we were raised in an environment where education was highly valued. So I was always able to use homework to get out of chores. It's like, Jackie, you need to do so and so. Excuse me, I have homework. Oh yeah, that's more important. Go. And this was a period that really allowed me to understand who I am, what's important in life, and really develop a strong sense of balance and fairness. So at 15, I moved to the US to live with my mother for the first time, and started college and worked through college to help make ends meet, sometimes as many as 30 hours a week. And here I am getting the bachelor's degree. So this was great, but this day was anticlimactic because the day before, this is what I was doing: marrying the love of my life, who still has that boyish grin. 2 months after this, I moved to North Carolina State University to start my graduate program. And really, I have been more or less at North Carolina State University since then. I had 1 year away at the University of Wisconsin and 3 years away at George Mason University in Virginia. But other than that, I really have been at North Carolina State University. So that's enough about me. Let's start talking about David Blackwell. It is not hyperbole to say that David Harold Blackwell was a once-in-a-lifetime, brilliant, off-the-charts, amazing genius. And in his own words, he worked in the areas of probability, game theory, information theory, and Bayesian inference. His first paper was published in 1942, and he retired in 1988. Over those 46 years, he published 84 papers and 2 books. His Google Scholar citation count of more than 16,000, I just grabbed these numbers yesterday, makes that almost 200 citations for each publication. Not a bad statistic if you can get it. And even this year, 2023, even though he retired in 1988, in 2023, he's had almost 600 citations so far. Professor Blackwell was known for being able to distill key ideas, then present them clearly and without unnecessary fanfare. This, no doubt, is at least part of what made him a fantastic teacher. And I actually really believe that this statement, "you don't need to say a lot to say a lot," really characterizes Professor Blackwell in every part of his life. Professors Thomas Ferguson and Peter Bickle are highly recognized statisticians. They spoke about Professor Blackwell's ability to just pop into a brand new area, discover something remarkable, then present it with exceptional clarity. His second most cited work is his first book. This book was originally published in 1954, joint with Professor Abe Gershik. And I'm going to say more about Abe Gershik when I get to his personal life, Professor Blackwell's personal life. So this book provides a thorough introduction to the theory of games and formulates statistical decisions as games. Professor Blackwell's work on game theory was intensified by his involvement in thinking about optimal strategies during war. This book, as I said, was first published in 1954. And even this year, it still has had 30 citations. His second book was one of the first textbooks on Bayesian inference. And this book has inspired many contemporary books on Bayesian inference. As I've said, Professor Blackwell worked in many areas. This is a small sample of areas. His work to compare experiments, in particular K-decision processes, has continued to be highly cited, more than 150 citations this year. His work on the structure of optimal solutions in dynamic programming has almost 100 citations this year. Dirichlet process priors are very popular in Bayesian inference. His work there has more than 80 citations this year. And Professor Blackwell's name is associated with many things: the Blackwell renewal theorem, Blackwell optimality in Markov decision processes, Blackwell games in logic, and the Rao-Blackwell theorem. He has also made fundamental contributions to Bayesian sequential analysis. So for all these things, he has received much recognition. He was the first African-American in many categories, being named fellow of both the Institute of Mathematical Statistics and the American Statistical Association, also as winner of the von Neumann Prize. He was elected to national and international leadership positions at many organizations: the Institute of Mathematical Statistics, the American Statistical Association, the International Statistical Institute, and the American Mathematical Society. The Mathematical Association of America and the National Association of Mathematicians have jointly named the Blackwell Lecture back in 1994. He's one of the giants for whom the Blackwell Tapia Prize and Conference are named. President Barack Obama awarded him the National Medal of Science in 2014, and University of California, Berkeley named a dorm after him in 2018. With Professor Blackwell's successes clearly out there, now I come back to this statement, but I'd like to shift the focus to the story behind his successes and argue that there were 5 themes running through his life that enabled his successes. He was buoyed by others, offering him a stable environment, support, both emotional and financial, expectancy that he would succeed. They believed in him, they advocated for him, and they created opportunities for him. These are things, I think, that speak to us in terms of what we can do moving forward. I'll also add that this is where I shift to offer many quotes from Professor Blackwell, and they almost all come from this amazing reference. I'll start with his childhood, where we see the first 3 themes demonstrated. Professor Blackwell's father only completed the 4th grade. Comparatively speaking, his mother was highly educated, but she only finished the 2nd year of high school. Nevertheless, they both expected their son to go to college. Expectancy. Professor Blackwell's maternal grandfather was actually a school teacher who had been educated in Ohio. When he moved to Southern Illinois, which is where Professor Blackwell was born, he became a businessman, and that helped to create financial support needed for his family to have stability. And this was during the Great Depression, right? Again, he was born in 1919, and his formative years were in the Great Depression, but he had stability of lifestyle because of what was provided by his family. When asked what piqued his interest in math, Professor Blackwell refers to a maternal uncle who was good at mental arithmetic. Now, this uncle never went to school, even though the uncle's father, Professor Blackwell's maternal grandfather, was an educator. He was educated again in Ohio, but his family grew up in Southern Illinois. And it was a different climate where the maternal grandfather was not comfortable sending his son to school, even though he did send his daughter to school. Now, this same grandfather had a large library, and it was actually there that Professor Blackwell saw his first algebra book. During his high school years, we see that there are people who had expectations of his success, who advocated for him and created opportunities. I believe in the power of speaking names. So throughout this presentation, there are a lot of names. Professor Blackwell got excited by geometry, and Caroline Luther was his teacher. Raymond Huck advised the math club, and this is where Professor Blackwell experienced his first pseudo-publication. Grace Sealer was his English teacher, and she encouraged him to go to college and secured a scholarship for him to go to college. In general, high school was robust and challenging, but with supportive teachers. This allowed Professor Blackwell to earn the top score in his county on the statewide college entrance exam. This guaranteed him a 4-year tuition scholarship to the University of Illinois. During his college and grad school years, Professor Blackwell benefited from support, advocates, and opportunities. He started college at the tender age of 16. He arrived on campus without a plan for where he would live. A Black fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha, took him in and provided shelter until he completed his PhD 6 years later. While the scholarship covered tuition, Professor Blackwell needed to have funds to cover living expenses. His father took out a loan to cover those expenses for the first year. After that, Professor Blackwell did odd jobs to support himself. Professor Craythorne was someone who helped him in many ways. And he created odd jobs just to allow Professor Blackwell to get money. And it's important here to mention that Craythorne introduced Professor Blackwell to Jersey Neyman. Jersey Neyman is the one who was responsible for Professor Blackwell to ultimately join University of California, Berkeley, which is where he spent the majority of his professional career. So I'm going to come back and say a bit more about Jersey Neyman. So Professor Blackwell finished his bachelor's degree in 3 years. He still had a 4th year of scholarship, so he used it to complete a master's degree. And during the master's degree, he decided he wanted to go on for a PhD. He applied for funding. Fellowships were, of course, more difficult to get than teaching assistantships, same as they are today. Professor Blackwell here, in talking with a colleague, surmises that he got a fellowship because in those days, a Black man serving as a teaching assistant simply would not work. But it worked out in his favor. This is one of those experiences that on the surface might seem negative, but actually turned out to be pretty positive. He did his dissertation with Professor Joseph Dube, and he defended at age 22. So Professor Dube was planning to visit the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton University and didn't want to leave his students behind, so he made sure to hurry up, and Professor Blackwell needed to hurry up and get that dissertation taken care of. In order to help his students grow, Professor Dube created even more opportunities. He intended to take his students with him to the Institute for Advanced Study. And so he learned about and helped Professor Blackwell apply for a Rosenwald Fellowship. The Rosenwald Fund had been created to eliminate inequities and generally for the well-being of mankind. It was targeted to Black scholars. This fellowship fully funded Professor Blackwell's time while he was at the Institute for Advanced Studies. Professor Blackwell continued to have many advocates who created opportunities for him. While at the Institute for Advanced Studies, he met Professor John von Neumann, the namesake for a prize he would later receive. A contemporary of his, Jimmy Savage, later convinced him to work on Bayesian inference. Professor Blackwell thought everything at the Institute for Advanced Studies went swimmingly. It was much later that he learned the ugly truth. His race almost kept him from the usual Princeton welcome offered to visitors. It was only after the director of the Institute and several of the professors associated with the Institute threatened to sever ties between the Institute and Princeton University that the president of Princeton University backed down and allowed Professor Blackwell to participate. Again, advocates, opportunities. And then it was time to get a job. Professor Blackwell did not waste time applying anywhere else than to faculty positions at Black colleges. He simply did not think that he would get a job anywhere other than at a Black college. He wrote to all of them and visited several. He took the first offer that came along. At Southern University, where he worked for a year, he only taught elementary undergraduate courses, so he moved on. The next year, he moved to Clark College in Atlanta. The region in Atlanta continues to this day to be a hub. There are several universities, and these universities have joint seminars. They cooperate in graduate education, and this was a good year for Professor Blackwell because he got to do some graduate teaching. It was also there that he met the woman who would become his wife. So lots of great things happened. But then he got his perfect job at Howard University. Howard University was definitely the place to be as a Black mathematician. Professor Elbert Cox was the first African-American to earn a PhD in math in 1925. He was a faculty member at Howard. The second African-American to earn a PhD in math was Professor Dudley Woodard. He happened to be the head at Howard University's math department, and he is the one who actually hired Professor Blackwell. Once Professor Blackwell joined Howard, he quickly rose through the ranks, and in 1947, he became department head, and ultimately he hired Professor William Claytor, who was the third African-American to get a PhD in math. By the way, Professor Blackwell was number 7, the 7th African-American to earn a PhD in math. So again, Howard University was the place to be as a Black mathematician. Professor Blackwell says that his interests were basically formed while he was at Howard. It was during those 10 years that he learned about game theory and optimization. So notice the years here, 1944 to 1954. He was near to the District of Washington, D.C. And so he had collaborations at the Operations Research Office. You know, this was World War II time. So game theory and optimization theory, he started during those years. He also participated in chapter meetings of the American Statistical Association. That's where he met Abe Gershik. This is who he wrote his first book with. And this is really where he got fully introduced into statistics. His work with Abe Gershik had him start consulting at RAND, and that consulting had him going out to California. He met up again with Jimmy Savage, and this led to a very flourishing collaboration where he became a full-fledged Bayesian. And it is also during this time that he wrote his paper that resulted in the so-called Rao-Blackwell theorem. So Rao-Blackwell theorem deserves a little extra time. I'm a statistician, so to me, it is really huge because every first-year statistics graduate student learns about the Rao-Blackwell theorem. Although when I learned about it, I didn't know that one of the authors was Black. So the story is quite inspirational and a bit sad at the same time. Professor Blackwell stumbled into this theorem because he was trying to understand. Remember his motivation. It's not research, but understand. He was trying to understand and explain a result that was published by his buddies, Abe Gershik and Jimmy Savage. He published his theorem and used it to explain why the result worked. As it turns out, Professor C.R. Rao, who another very exceptional statistician who I admire very much and who recently passed, had published the same result 2 years earlier as one of the many results in his dissertation, in his thesis. Folks weren't reading that part of Professor Rao's dissertation, but they were reading Professor Blackwell's paper. So they independently came up with this theorem, but Professor Rao had done it 2 years earlier. Eventually, Professor Blackwell stopped citing his own theorem. So after 10 years at Howard, Professor Blackwell moved to the University of California at Berkeley. He quickly became chair of the newly formed Department of Statistics. And the story could stop there, right? He became assistant dean. He was the first African-American who was tenured at Berkeley. All of that is great. But there's a backstory to this. Jersey Neyman, Professor Jersey Neyman, had met David Blackwell when David Blackwell was just an undergraduate student in 1937. In 1942, when David Blackwell was now on the market after his year at the Institute for Advanced Studies, Jersey Neyman interviewed him and wanted to hire him at UC Berkeley. The math department agreed to hire him. But according to what Professor Blackwell learned, the department head's wife, who would usually hold social events at her home for individuals in the math department, would not have any darkies in her house. And so an offer of employment was not extended for 12 years. So 12 years later is when Jersey Neyman came back around, and really Professor Blackwell was appointed in the newly formed Department of Statistics. What is to be must be. So let's summarize what we've learned so far. We ought to focus on understanding. The rest will come later. When writing, we ought to write with clarity and brevity. Break things down as simply as you can. Unnecessary fanfare just detracts. And then there are these recurring themes. And the way I at least look at it in my life is I need to be in spaces where these themes are present. And if I can't find them, then I need to create my own environment where these exist, even if they're external to my professional environment. But professionally, you're never going to succeed unless there are at least some advocates who are going to create opportunities for you. We all need stability. We all need all kinds of support. And at some point, we need for others to believe in us with an expectation that we will succeed. So now let me switch to the last part of my talk. The mathematical and statistical sciences have benefited tremendously by giants like Professor Blackwell and Professor Richard Tapia. Richard Tapia is Latinx, and he's very well known for mathematical computing. I love this quote by him: "Racial equality cannot be achieved without educational equality." These men relied on their brilliance to forge their own way, but they got help from their supporters and advocates who created opportunities. Have we created opportunities for the next generation? Are we providing doctoral level training to diversify the mathematical and statistical sciences? So let me address that with this graphic. This graphic stops at 2018, really because I have not been able to get a chance to get census numbers to update this beyond 2018. But the bottom two curves, the solid curves at the bottom here, represent the actual number of PhDs earned by US citizens who are Black, the red curve, and Latinx, the blue curve. These numbers are not huge. The dashed curves are where we ought to be based on US Census population counts. There is a clear disconnect. This is an unanswered opportunity. So this is within the mathematical sciences, which includes statistics. This is including pure math and applied math, just everything. What if we look at just statistics? Now, this will include biostatistics as well. Well, the numbers are no better. We still see that there is a huge unanswered opportunity. This needs to change, and it will only change if we all do our part. We can enable success by being there for someone else. Anyone can do this. Yes, it can sometimes involve risk. Think about the year that was spent at the Institute of Advanced Analytics by David Blackwell, where people had to stand up and say, no, we will walk out. We will sever ties if you don't make this right. But who knows which David Blackwell we may be cultivating by doing this. And here are my references. And I thank you for your attention. I am happy to entertain any questions or comments.
Thank you, Jacqueline, for